The OS that Disney erased, Hannah Montana Linux. In 2009, the internet birthed a project so visually chaotic it became an instant legend, Hannah Montana Linux. It was a Kubuntu-based OS themed entirely around the Disney Channel star, featuring neon purple windows and best of both worlds wallpapers. While it started as a tongue-in-cheek joke among the Linux community, it quickly spiraled into a legal nightmare. Disney is famously protective of its intellectual property, and a piece of software using their flagship star's face and trademark name was essentially a suicide mission. The OS was effectively banned from mainstream hosting sites as copyright notices began to fly, but the legal trouble wasn't the only thing that killed it. The OS was notoriously unstable, often crashing during the installation of basic drivers, leading many to call it cursed software. It remains the ultimate example of a fandom OS, a project that was legally erased by a media giant and technically sabotaged by its own pink and purple code. It's now a forbidden ISO that only exists in the darkest corners of archive sites, serving as a warning to any developer thinking about mixing teen pop stars with open source kernels. The digital death sentence, Suicide Linux. Most operating systems are designed to be a safety net for your data, but Suicide Linux was built to be a digital executioner. It wasn't banned by a specific government decree, but it was socially banned and blacklisted by IT departments and hosting platforms for being functionally indistinguishable from a virus. The premise is a psychological horror story for coders. The OS modifies the standard Linux shell so that every time you enter a command, it is validated against a list of correct syntax. If you make a single typo, a misplaced space, a forgotten semicolon, or a simple spelling error, the OS immediately initiates rf. Within seconds, the system begins deleting every single file on your hard drive, including itself. It was originally created as a hardcore challenge for elite sysadmins who believed they were above human error. However, the OS quickly became a favorite tool for digital vandals. Malicious users would trick newbies into installing it or hide the suicide script inside seemingly innocent software packages. Because its primary function is the total destruction of user data, it was purged from reputable software repositories and flagged by security suites. It remains the only operating system in history that was effectively outlawed by the tech community because its killer feature was a literal death penalty for a keyboard slip. The $100 million government fraud, Kylin OS. In the early 2000s, China set out to break its dependency on Western tech by commissioning a revolutionary homegrown operating system called Kylin OS. It was marketed as a ground-up masterpiece of Chinese engineering, specifically designed to make their military and government networks impenetrable to foreign intelligence. The project received massive state funding and was hailed as a symbol of national sovereignty. However, the national pride turned into a global laughingstock in 2006 when a Chinese student using the handle DanceFire performed a kernel analysis. The results were devastating. Kylin wasn't a new creation at all, it was a near-exact clone of FreeBSD 5.3. The developers hadn't invented a new kernel, they had essentially used a find and replace tool to swap the word FreeBSD with Kylin throughout the source code. Over 99% of the code was identical to the American-made open-source project. This copy-paste revelation led to a swift and brutal internal ban on the original version. The government was humiliated for trying to pass off open-source homework as a secret military weapon. While the name survives today as a legitimate project, the original FreeBSD clone was scrubbed from official use and effectively erased from history to hide the shame of a $100 million national fake. The OS that was a weapon, NetWare 3.x. During the 1990s, Novell NetWare was the undisputed king of the office, the OS that practically invented modern networking. But it ran into a bizarre legal wall that had nothing to do with bugs or crashes. The US government classified its high-level encryption as a munition under the International Traffic in Arms Regulations, ITAR. Software with strong security was legally treated the same as a Tomahawk missile or a stealth bomber. Because NetWare's encryption was so robust, the US government officially banned the export of the full-strength version to almost every other country on Earth. This created a schizophrenic OS crisis. Novell was forced to maintain two entirely separate versions of the same system. The domestic version was ironclad, while the export version had to be intentionally crippled with weak 40-bit encryption that the NSA could crack in minutes. If a company accidentally shipped the strong version to an office in London or Tokyo, they faced massive federal fines and years in prison. This legal ban on security meant that for an entire decade, the global economy was forced to run on a version of NetWare that was purposely designed to be vulnerable. It remains a chilling reminder of a time when the government didn't treat an OS as software but as a weapon of war. The trillion-dollar name war, Chromixium. Chromixium was the perfect operating system that never should have existed. It was a brilliant remix that combined the sleek, fast interface of Google's Chrome OS with the full, unrestricted power of Ubuntu Linux. It was everything users actually wanted a Chromebook to be, a device that could run a web browser and a high-end video editor at the same time. But being too good was its ultimate downfall. Google's legal department immediately set their sights on the project, not because the code was stolen, but because the branding was too similar to their trademarked Chromium and Chrome brands. Google launched a legal blitz, claiming that Chromixium was causing massive brand confusion in the marketplace. The developers tried to dodge the legal hammer by frantically rebranding the entire project as Cub Linux, Chrome, plus Ubuntu. However, the damage was already done. Google continued to apply pressure, essentially banning the project through legal and financial attrition. The lead developer, realizing he couldn't win a court battle against a trillion-dollar giant, simply deleted the project and vanished from the scene. It wasn't banned for being a security risk. It was legally erased because it was a better version of a product Google was already selling, proving that in tech, sometimes the lawyers are more dangerous than the hackers. The OS that watched you, Zamin OS. In a move toward technological decolonization, the Iranian government attempted to ban Windows in favor of their own state-sponsored OS, Zamin. Marketed as the ultimate Islamic operating system, it was pitched as a secure, culturally appropriate alternative to Western software. In 2013, the Iranian state issued a sweeping decree. Windows was officially banned in all government offices, and every civil servant was ordered to migrate their data to Zamin within 6 months. The government claimed this was a move for national security, but the reality was far more sinister. Security researchers discovered that Zamin wasn't built for security, it was built for total state surveillance. The OS came pre-installed with government-mandated root certificates that allowed the state to intercept and read every single piece of encrypted traffic the moment the user logged on. The ban on Windows was actually a trap designed to force the entire population into a digital panopticon. However, the OS was so poorly optimized and riddled with bugs that it couldn't even handle basic administrative tasks. The total ban eventually collapsed under the weight of its own technical failures, leaving Zamin as a failed experiment in digital tyranny, a forbidden OS that was too broken to even spy on its citizens correctly. The forbidden desktop, SkyOS. For over a decade, SkyOS was the most envied operating system on the internet. Built by a single developer, Robert Seleny, it was a closed-source project that was faster and more beautiful than Windows, Mac, or Linux combined. It had a devoted cult following of users who were willing to pay for better licenses just to catch a glimpse of the future of computing. But as SkyOS approached its highly anticipated version 5 release, it hit a legal wall that resulted in a community ban that broke the project's back. Because SkyOS was written from scratch, it lacked the massive library of hardware drivers that Windows and Linux enjoyed. To fix this, the developer began using open-source drivers from the Linux kernel. This triggered a massive GPL violation controversy. The open-source community effectively blacklisted the project, accusing Seleny of stealing community-built code for a paid, private product. The legal and social pressure became an unbearable weight. Faced with the threat of massive lawsuits and being shunned by the very developers he needed to support him, he pulled the plug. He banned the public from ever seeing the code again and took the project offline forever. SkyOS went from a Windows killer to a forbidden piece of vaporware, legally trapped in a limbo where it couldn't exist as a commercial product. The cult of the Beliebers, Biebian. Shortly after the rise of Hannah Montana Linux, a group of pranksters on 4chan decided to push the limits of copyright law even further by creating Biebian, an operating system dedicated entirely to Justin Bieber. It featured a Belieber boot screen, custom Justin Bieber wallpapers, and a baby-themed desktop interface. While it was intended as a harmless internet meme, it quickly ran into a legal buzzsaw. Record labels and Bieber's management team viewed the OS as a massive trademark infringement that tarnished the brand's image. The OS was systematically hunted down and banned from major hosting platforms like SourceForge and GitHub via DMCA takedowns. But beyond the legalities, security experts issued a community ban, warning that Biebian was a joke project with zero security updates or patches. This made it a playground for hackers who were looking to build botnets out of the computers of unsuspecting fans. It was effectively blacklisted by the internet's own security guardians to prevent believers from unknowingly turning their family PCs into open targets for identity theft. It serves as a hilarious but sharp warning. An operating system is a serious tool, and when you try to build a kernel around a pop star, the lawyers and the hackers will always find you first.